to Teen and Butty Podcast. I'm Erica.
And I'm Dominic.
And today we are going to continue our discussion that we started on Tuesday.
Yes.
Which was about World War II.
In the USA.
Yes. Only today we're going to talk about wartime Britain.
Wartime Britain, yes.
Yes. World War II wartime.
Yes.
Yeah.
World War II wartime.
Because God knows there were enough wars in Britain over the years.
Well, yes. And there have been since. But really, I think, World War II, it's a source, as is World War I. But World War II mainly, I think, because, with World War I, it was kind of just a case of
nothing
vast
happened.
Opposing armies. Well, nothing really happened
in Britain in World War I, did it?
No, not really. I think there was a slight rationing, but not too much.
Well, no, as far as, World War II, Britain was actually being bombed.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas during World War I...
It was the vast opposing armies of the Austro-Hungary Empire and the Germans.
Yeah.
Mainly the German Empire. And Britain and its allies.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't really the same thing again in World War II. Nazi Germany had the Nazi war machine basically just invaded all of Europe.
Yeah.
It began Britain tried to appease Germany in late 1938 with Neville Chamberlain and his piece of paper. I have in my hand a piece of paper, the Munich Pact. Mm-hmm. And it basically gave Germany permission to invade a small part of Czechoslovakia, as it was known then.
Yeah.
Called Sudetenland. Sudetenland, I think it was, yeah. And so it was like, oh yeah, you can have that bit because, I don't know why Hitler wanted it, because Hitler wanted everything ultimately, didn't he?
Maybe it was just like, let me just say I just want this to start off.
Yeah.
And they'll be none the wiser when I take over the world.
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah. I think that's what it was. And so he invaded that little bit, and then he invaded fully a few months later. Czechoslovakia was pretty much invaded by Germany and taken. And so they were just and then the British government came out and said, well, we're going to stand by Poland if you ever try to invade Poland, because I think they knew his ultimate goal was Poland.
Yeah.
But what they didn't realize is Stalin and him had signed a secret pact saying we're going to divide up Poland between us.
Secret pact.
Russia and Germany will just divide it up. We'll have the East, you have the West,
Yeah.
And, that was without the British knowing. It was like this. And so eventually, the Chamberlain issued this ultimatum to Hitler you just stop what you're doing now.
Yeah.
You better stop. And Hitler ignored it, and they invaded Poland anyway, and that's when, on the 1st of... I think it was the 3rd of September in 1939, Britain and France declared war.
Yeah.
And Britain was effectively at war, obviously.
Yeah.
But a couple of days before that, the whole country had kind of known it was going to happen. They were like, yeah, Hitler can't be stopped now. Even though he'd been declared Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1938.
Yes. Yeah. He'd done great things for Germany as far as getting them out of the Depression.
Economically, he was a good leader.
No one else, or not no one else, but the rest of the world was having a difficult time getting out of the Depression. And it was like he came in and he got them out of the Depression in no time. He recovered the economy and it was just like, everybody was kind of in awe of that. And so, he was Time Magazine in America. Yeah, Time Magazine's Person of the Year.
It was a great chance because I think obviously he rose to power through, the Hitler Youth or whatever, the fascists party and all that, And there was a rise of fascism in Britain with Oswald Mosley.
Yeah.
And they were like, yes, Hitler, and we this is the way. But of course, obviously, with Oswald Mosley, when Hitler turned mad,
Yeah.
And everybody could see, and, oh, this Hitler must be stopped.
Everybody was like,
actually, fascism isn't the way,
yeah.
So, him and his fascism movement were quickly denounced.
Him and his fascism movement.
Yeah, well, that's what it was, Oswald Mosley was a bit of a twat, at the end of the day. As was Hitler. But yes, I mean, that's what happened. A couple of days before the official declaration of war, Britain had started the blackout.
Oh, yes.
The blackout.
Yeah,
And it wasn't popular. I mean, as you said, it was like the masks and stuff now.
Well, no, we read recently on Facebook someone comparing. It was just a little thing like, oh, imagine during the war when all of Britain was told to black out their windows, to put their lights out and everything.
Yeah.
Imagine if somebody sitting at home went, no, I'll have my light on if I want to, thank you very much. And, they were comparing that to people over here or people around the world being told to wear their masks because it as blacking out their windows and turning their lights out was for their own safety, was for their own good. So are wearing masks, so that was where the comparison was. But you said there actually were people. Oh, there were
the morale was lowered considerably with this.
Yeah.
Again, because you just got out of the Great Depression. I mean, well, Britain hadn't really fully recovered from it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, again, we're being shoved into this war where we've got to, rationing's beginning and we've got to do, we've got to black out our windows. And, of course, factories and stuff. We're like, well, we've got, these glass ceilings. How are we going to do that?
Yeah.
Blacking, because we need to work through the night to get this stuff done.
Right.
And so we need light, so we can't, we'll have to paint the windows, and the windows still let light in.
Yeah.
And of course, over-officious ARP wardens were coming round saying, oh, put that light out. Don't you know there's a war on?
Yeah.
And, it's just like, oh.
On one hand, you can see...
Because even a sliver of light...
Yeah.
...would, cost... You get in serious trouble for it. You get fined.
Mm-hmm. But I like how there's this idea that, it was a war on, so everybody was willing to do
pull
their
together
part.
the Blitz spirit, is what they call it.
When in reality, there were people, even back then, that were just like, nah, I'm going to keep my light on, thank you very much.
No, I don't agree with that. I'm going to put my light on whenever I feel like it. I might actually have a light in the window, too. Come on, flack you, Fritz.
On one hand, flack you.
Yeah, like the flack from flack you, Fritz, those people.
On one hand, it's like, just put your light out, it's not...
Put that light out!
It's like, come on, we're being bombed here.
We're being bombed here. Oh my God, yeah.
Just put your light out. You can imagine being really pissed off as this person's neighbor.
Well, yes, I can imagine because, it's like, it's just unnecessary... Belligerence. You got the ARP guy coming round, and I can imagine with their tin hats with ARP on, years later in comedies like Dad's Army and, Goodnight Sweetheart, they were portrayed as these little officious men in tin hats, with a gas mask and going, put that light out. Don't you know there's a war on? Yeah. You're going to be fine. That's it. I'll have you for that.
And you kind of feel like, oh yeah, why wouldn't they have just put their light out? But at the same time, on the other hand, I cannot imagine that the Nazis cared whether they saw lights or not.
I think years later it came out.
Britain's down there, just drop the bombs.
Yeah, and it was kind of like, oh no, you're using the lights to guide them to cities and all that kind of stuff, so they can, use it. And I think years later, the German bombers and all that, who flew, said no, we were following the Thames. Oh, we were following the train tracks.
Right.
Into the cities and stuff like that. That's how we knew.
Of course they had specific
bodies of water
that they wanted to hit, but they weren't like, oh no, those are houses down there, we don't want to hit those. It's like, well, this is the Nazis we were talking about. Yeah, they didn't care.
And up and even as a kid, we were always, as when I was a kid, in the early 1990s. they were still finding unexploded bombs, because so much tonnage was dropped on cities, especially in London and Liverpool. All the port cities and stuff like that, like some of it didn't explode, and it just got built over,
And it was mostly the port cities that were being bombed,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it wasn't like, out in the country, right? Because, well, we're going to get to that point, I think, in a second, but that's where they sent all the kids, isn't it?
Operation Pied Piper was put into effect.
Yeah, because
evacuate the children.
Because they weren't bombing country estates and like little villages things like that, right?
They weren't flying out there because, I mean, at the end of the day, you had the anti-flak guns and the anti-aircraft guns. You also had the RAF, the Battle of Britain, that kind of like, because, that's what Hitler wanted. He wanted air superiority over Britain so they could invade.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted, and that's why the invasion of Britain was cancelled, because the RAF effectively foiled that.
Yeah. With
the Battle of Britain in 1940. But they still continued to come over and bomb, later in the war it would be like doodle bugs, they call it. It was like automated bombs that they just send over and just blow up wherever,
wherever,
where it wasn't even like, human
whether the light
guided.
was on or not.
Whether the light was on or not, you got bombed. Well, I mean, even in the country, Yeah. If one happened to land in a field and explode and kill all the cows or whatever, or the sheep or whatever, that was it. But, back during the very early start of the Blitz, is what they called it, and it lasted 8 months from September 1940 to May 1941.
Yeah.
And it was a major event because the most intense period was the start, when London was systematically and continuously bombed for 56 nights.
Yeah.
So... And then, people were getting down into the Anderson shelters, which was...
It was to cause damage, wasn't it? But it was also
No, it was to lower morale. It was Hitler just going, wear the British spirit down. Yeah. And that's where they get the Blitz spirit from,
Yeah.
Because witnesses at the time, like foreigners, Americans who'd been in London during the war, was like, oh, yes, the Londoner... They're not fazed by this, there's no kind of like, and people who were like psychoanalyzing the morale, like people weren't having like shell shock, or people weren't having like that kind of thing. They were just getting on with their life, like, oh, 90,
interesting. That's so
old Madge got bombed out last night,
I never ever, you always hear about and you always think about soldiers who were in the war having what they called at the time shell shock. Now we call it PTSD, Yeah. But you never ever think about the general public private citizen who was not fighting anything. Yeah. Whose house got bombed out, or who was repeatedly having to go down into the London Underground or wherever, or these underground shelters.
Well, they build. Well, some people who didn't live in London,
right,
and they didn't have access to an underground or didn't know anyone. They used to have a back garden or an allotment, even. They had these Anderson shelters, which were named after the Minister of War, which were just basically corrugated iron sheets.
Oh, yeah.
That were, half buried in the garden, and, they'd send kids, and the families would just go out and sit in there when an air raid siren went off. And it's like, that thing was, if that got a direct hit, they were dead. It wasn't going to protect them at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it might protect them from the house exploding or whatever, but it's just...
It was just to give them peace of mind, I guess, a little bit of like, so they didn't have to worry
it's
so
like,
much,
it was very blitzy last night, wasn't it,
But, I remember talking to your gran
about it?
Just about being bombed, and she said, because she was a nurse during the war, wasn't she?
Yeah, and she was sent to, she was posted to all the port towns and stuff,
that's where she was, and she said, oh yeah, we'd have to go underground when the bombing.
Oh, yes, had to go underground, yes. I mean, it was just kind of like it was accepted as fact, But
you don't think about these people who, and I mean, did she seem like she had any PTSD, or do you remember hearing stories from your...
No.
your dad or your
No, actually, no.
and
And he
your
was...
uncle that...
Yeah, no.
And you never do. You never do hear about these people who were being bombed.
Because
their homes were under threat for years. You never hear about them, like, having PTSD or, like, flashbacks or...
Yeah. I mean, I imagine there was kind of like a little bit of depression and a little bit of, like, just general kind of like, anxiety, like, tonight I hope I don't get bombed out because it'll be very annoying,
Yeah.
And, it's like a little bit of like, depression is like, I just got bombed out. So good. But it was just kind of like there was a community spirit in like, oh yeah, you can come and DOS with us, and
I mean, surely
our house is still standing.
Surely there were some people, especially people who lived in these port towns that were being bombed all the time. Surely there are some people who had members of their family who did experience PTSD and who did have flashbacks throughout the rest of their life about having been bombed, maybe nightmares or whatever. Surely that must be a thing somewhere.
And it's
because
like they talk about it.
It only makes sense for it to be, but you just you don't hear anybody talk about it really.
Well, no, like I'm talking about like shows and stuff, of the time and well, not of the time, but of the period dramas from the 40s. They'd be talking. Just like, old Mrs. Hardcastle got bombed out last night. She was in bed and, bam, that's the end of it.
Yeah.
She all right? Yeah, she's all right, but the house is gone.
Yeah. Yeah, they make it just seem like, just casual, terrible, the house got bombed. But it's just like, yeah, but someone lived through that.
Or if you were buried under the rubble for, like, days before they got to you, because I mean the stories of those survivors and stuff, it's like, I survived 10 days underneath my house.
Oh my god.
Because it's like I've seen those kind of stories and stuff.
That is so interesting because there's so many films that focus on the war, but they're just focusing on the soldiers. They're just focusing on,
the exciting bits of like.
I mean, that's not exciting. London being bombed out. Like,
yeah.
I want to see a movie focusing on the people that were living in London. I say London. Obviously London was not the only city that was bombed. Liverpool was bombed. Birmingham was bombed.
Yeah, Cardiff. Edinburgh. Yeah, all them. The port cities.
So I say London. I don't mean London. I know that London is not the only city in Britain. They
were focusing though on London, because that was the capital and everything.
Right.
And they were hoping, but I mean, statistically, the West End, like Westminster and where the Houses of Parliament are, it didn't really catch much.
Which is kind of weird.
Yeah, it was only the East End because they were trying to bomb the docks, yeah.
But you would have thought they would have tried to bomb, you would have thought just to make a point, bomb the Houses of Parliament.
I mean, I'm sure there was one German bomber somewhere that was probably like, yes, I'm going to get the Houses of Parliament into there, yes, Because he was a German spy with a British accent.
Oh, yes, I'm going to bomb the Houses
of Parliament. Yes, I'm going to get the Germans.
But no, I think it would be really interesting and just a different take on the war because there is so much focus on the war.
Yeah.
For there to be, some story told about just the people who were living in any of these port cities who were bombed and what kind of effect that had on their lives. Well, I would watch that movie,
I think there was a lot more stress on the kids that were evacuated.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Operation Pied Piper, which evacuated... I think 24,000 kids went overseas to like Australia and stuff like that in the beginning. But then they all came back.
That is crazy though, because they weren't shipping them off to relatives who lived like in Australia.
They were just sticking a name tag around them.
That's so...
and giving them a little suitcase with a teddy bear and telling them, okay. And their mothers had to do it because, and it's like there was those propaganda posters that were like, "Don't do it, mother. Leave them where they are. You know, if you take them back, then you're giving Hitler a chance. You know, and all that kind of stuff."
What?
Because, you know, there was some parents who were like, "I don't want my kids away from me."
Yeah.
But they were like, "No, you've got to have them away because, you know,
I
you're
mean, whose
essential."
idea?
The British government, you know, the government's like, you've got to send your kids away. It's
because you have like the Chronicles of Narnia, let's say.
Oh, the Chronicles of Narnia,
which highlights it. That's kind of the whole point of the story, right? These kids
Narnia,
get sent, but they're not getting sent to Australia. They're just being sent like to where, like the countryside.
The countryside,
somewhere.
yeah. There was a lot that was sent to the countryside, and they were sent to live with families and stuff.
And they just had little tags on them, and they were sent to go basically.
Please look after this child. Thank you.
Basically, go live with people that they don't know. I don't remember if
you
were
had
some
if
sort
you
of
had a
distant
relative that lived. If you had a relative that lived out in the country, then yeah, they'd send you.
But they didn't know this person.
But sometimes you'd get someone to sign up and say, "Do you want to be in the?
Do you want to take in some kids?
Do you want to take in some kids on this farm?"
Oh my god!
And it's like sometimes the life was better for them out there because they had plenty to eat because they lived on a farm, and you know they didn't really feel the pinch of rationing because they were getting it fresh.
Yeah.
But people in the cities, you know, the rationing food and everything was like you couldn't get anything, and the queues were absolutely everywhere, you know.
But I can't remember. But it seems like we just recently saw something. I don't know if it was a movie that came out or what, but it was dealing with this kid. Stop me if you can remember what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know.
This kid that comes back. And he's been gone, like, what? Since when did that...
1940 they start. Well,
1940. Okay, so he doesn't come back. He doesn't get to come back then until, like, say, after the war sometime. Do you remember what it was? And he doesn't even really remember his parents because he was so little. He was, like, 3 or 4, and he's just like, oh, I've got to come back and live. Yeah, I don't remember
what that one was.
You know, like, 5 years later now, I've got to come back and live with these people that I do not really remember, you know? I can't remember what that was either. But,
yeah.
But I mean, that was true life, wasn't it? You know?
That was true life. I mean, if they were young enough, then yeah.
Yeah, you don't really start remembering things till you're like 5 or 6. You go...
Sometimes their parents were killed, you know, and while they were evacuated and they had no home to come back to, or a relative they didn't know that lived in the city, and it's just kind of like... Oh, I don't really like living here, you know. I preferred it out in Gloucestershire or, you know... Wherever it was, you know.
But let's think of like this little
Berkshire,
a little 5 or 6 year old who gets sent away for 5 years.
Yeah.
You know, they're being sent away just when they're starting to remember things, really.
Yeah.
You know, so they come back then and they've got to live with these parents, these people who are like, who are you? You know, oh, you're my mom and dad. Oh, great. You know.
Are you?
Yeah, it's like, oh, I kind of like these other people I've been living with. Actually,
I was just having a slap-up binge with Mrs. Miggins. Now I've got to come back to this, you know, one slice of bacon and powdered egg and all this kind of stuff. It's just like terrible.
Everything's just rubble around me.
Grim.
Yeah.
People
terrible, right?
People putting cold tea on their legs. Women were anyway, the men.
Explain that for people who don't know what you're talking about.
You know, because nylons and stockings and stuff were so short in the war, women used to dye their legs with cold tea and draw a line up the back for the seam.
That is so sad. I mean, come on.
You know, dye their legs with cold black tea to make it look like they've got a stocking on, you know, and draw a line up the thing, and it's just kind of like, you know... As like until the Americans entered the war, and that's why they were like, "Oh, got here, got your nylons, got your stockings.
Here, hon, some stockings.
Brought you some stockings. Put them on your legs. I just want to see those pasty legs."
Oh my god, you guys should check out on YouTube. Dominic and I were watching. Oh, I've seen it before actually, but it was like for Americans overseas, what to do,
how to behave in Britain. I think it's the U.S. National Archive. Meredith Burgess.
Yeah.
Or Burgess Meredith. Burgess Meredith, that's it.
I don't know.
He was an actor.
And it was a legitimate film that they showed. It was
a GI training film.
What to
how
do,
to behave
what
in Britain.
Not to do. It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And there's humor in it and stuff. And
of course, yeah.
And actually, I mean,
and actual generals of the time.
You'll find things funny just because of the way that it's portrayed.
The way that it's portrayed, yeah.
I can't remember what the title is, but if you just type that into YouTube, it's so interesting.
It's How to Behave in Britain at 1943, I think it was. Mm-hmm. Because America entered the war after Pearl Harbor in 1941. So, you know, the US started deploying its troops into Britain quite regularly, you know, by 1942, 43, you know.
Mm-hmm. We'll actually have to do another episode somewhere down the line where we kind of make the points that they're saying in that video to see whether it's true.
Because people still make fun of it, you know. It's quite a funny video to watch, you know. Mm-hmm. And you got Burgess Meredith there playing this GI guy, and he's just like, "Oh, now watch this. What this guy does here now."
Yeah.
Oh, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be flashing your money around.
Yeah.
Or, you know, chewing gum because these people don't have anything.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Anyway.
Anyway, yes. Well, yeah. I think we've covered pretty much everything.
Yeah, I mean we've hit a lot of the main points. I think the blackout, the bombing, the sending the kids away, the
sending the kids. Yeah, the rationing was terrible. I mean,
rationing is really an
episode all unto itself. Yeah, really, because I mean it's kind of terrible what people were eating back then.
Yeah,
they had absolutely nothing, and that's where that's where the stereotype, you know, like the American, you know, GIs would come back to America and go, "Oh, British food, man, it's terrible."
Yeah, that's where it came
absolutely from. Terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you couldn't get anything over there. Couldn't get a hamburger. Couldn't get a steak. Couldn't get proper eggs.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can understand where that comes from, and the rationing was a lot more strict 1954 than it was in America, and lasted a lot longer.
Yeah, 1954 it ended, so well after the war ended. And of course, you know, that's getting into the whole, because Britain had no money left because it was giving it all to America for all the armaments and everything, and you know, all that kind of thing. You know, there's been arguing. I was reading this like argument between Uncle Sam and John Bull. You know, about the wartime, you know, Lend-Lease Act and everything, you know, and you know, both of them, you know, just made it out, you know. It was actually pretty interesting, so maybe we'll do that one day.
I think it's just you mentioning Uncle Sam just reminded me that during that video that we were watching on YouTube, they were calling the Brits Tommies. I thought the Americans were called Tommies during the war.
No, Tommy, the English Tommy.
What did they call the Americans?
Tommy,
just Yanks?
Yanks, yeah.
The
Yanks.
Yeah.
Yanks coming over here, innit? Yeah, no, the British soldier was called Tommy.
Yeah.
Tommy Atkins, for some weird reason, I guess, because that's the general name, like, you know, John Hancock or John, you know, John Doe. It's like Tommy Atkins was and I don't know if there actually ever was a Tommy Atkins. It's from the First World War. It's like, oh yes, the Tommy, you know.
Yeah.
Tommy Atkins, you know.
Yeah. We were explaining recently to
maybe that's what British prisoners of war gave their name as to the Germans.
Oh yeah.
And so it became, if what's your name? Tommy Atkins. It's like, no, you cannot be Tommy Atkins because everyone else is Tommy Atkins. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm making that up, so I've got to do some more research on that.
We recently for some reason, my nephew was getting really into Tom and Jerry, and so we recently were explaining to him and my niece where the names Tom and Jerry came from, and for anybody who might by chance not know, that's why Tom and Jerry, the cartoon characters, are called Tom and Jerry.
Tommy was basically the Allied soldier. I mean, Tommy was like, you know, he could be an American soldier, but I've heard
the Allied forces were just generally referred to.
I'm guessing so, but I've only ever heard it referred to like a British soldier in, like, you know, that kind of context.
Yeah.
Because I mean, British war films and whatever. It's like, for you, Tommy, the war is over.
And then Britain loves a nickname, so of course they shortened the Germans
Tommy
to the Jerrys. Yeah.
Yeah, the Germans, Jerrys. Yeah, they were the Jerrys.
Yeah.
Old Jerry, and in the First World War, the Germans were called the Hun.
The Hun. Yeah,
Yeah.
what was that?
I think it was something to do with the Attila the Hun, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You know, it's like, oh, the Hun. You know, the Bosch.
Yeah.
You know, the Bosch, Fritz.
Yeah,
Fritz,
yeah.
you know, anything kind of like derogatory or anything like that, you know.
Yeah, right.
Sausage suckers and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, they were all about the derogatory names back then, weren't they?
So I have no idea what they called British people, you know, Tommy. I mean, Tommy is what they like to say. Oh, the good old honest Tommy.
Yeah.
On the front line, you know.
Yeah. But anyway, I think we are.
But for us, Tommy, the war talk is over.
Yes. Yeah, me and Dominic are both kind of interested in the world wars, if you haven't noticed that. So we could really
reenact them every day. You know?
we reenact.
She plays Jerry, I play Tom.
Oh my god. Anyway. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We hope you found this topic interesting. We always welcome anything you guys want to hear us talk about. We like to talk, if you haven't noticed, so
Woo! Yes, we do.
we can kind of ramble on about most things. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. We appreciate your support as always, and we will talk to you guys next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Or auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.